I'm Alan Sykes, and with me today is Scott Sykes with Sykes and Company, PA. We are a CPA and advisory firm that works solely with pharmacies all over the country using cloud-based solutions to help provide accounting, tax mitigation, and tax compliance. And today with us, we have representatives from First Financial Bank, Bob Grawl, and Bo Garman. They are pharmacy specialists with First Financial Bank. And we have a slide presentation that we're going to go through. I'll let them talk here for a few minutes, and you'll have an opportunity to put in questions as we go along, and we'll attempt to answer as many of them as we can. We're going to send this recording out to everybody that was registered today, and also be on our website as well. But we appreciate you joining us today. So, Scotty, you want to say a word before we give it over to Bob and Bo?
Sure. Appreciate everybody getting on. Please submit your questions. We'll be taking those as we move along here. But as everyone knows, it's been a busy year. With COVID and everything, and with the new law, new legislation, so financing and all the programs available today, there's been a lot of changes there. So Bob, Bo, take it away. Tell us about it.
All right, thank you very much. First, I introduce ourselves just a little bit. Bo is a lender with us. He covers about half the country. Bo, I believe you've been with us about what 7, 8 years, if I'm not mistaken.
You're just kidding. I've got a few more there, Bo. Almost a little over 9.
A little over 9. All right. And I work as a consultant for the company. I was managing director for a number of years and semi-retired. I'm the old guy on the team. So anyway, between us, we've seen hundreds of these deals go through. So like today, what we'd like to talk to you a little bit about is what you're going to need to buy or start a pharmacy, valuations we'll talk about, and a little bit of do's and don'ts on acquisitions. Olin, next. Why are we qualified? Why should you work with us, and what makes us qualified? Bo, you want to walk through what makes us qualified?
Sure. A little bit about us. The First Financial Bank was established in 1934 with headquarters in El Dorado, Arkansas. Still to this day, locally owned and locally managed with specialty lending divisions that serve our clients really nationwide. We're the largest SBA lenders in the country. Because of that volume, we have a preferred lender status with the SBA, which allows us to expedite some loan approvals in-house and not have to send those to SBA for their approval. Got into the pharmacy space a little over 9 years ago. And it's proven to be a good move for us. And I'm proud to say, over the last year, we've done more SBA loans than any other bank in the country by number. As you mentioned, Bob mentioned, our team consists of myself, another lender, Drew, hey guy, who couldn't be with us today, but we're the loan officers out in the field. Bob and Larry Alexander make up our management team. Combined, we have over 80 years of experience in pharmacy and in banking. I think, Bob, you might make up 50. Is that right? 50%?
Yeah, if I ever leave the bank, that number drops dramatically. So.
Come on.
No, but seriously, we're fortunate to have Bob. Bob, owned. Bob is a pharmacist, number one. He owned multiple stores in Southern California. He sold those and then started a second career where he joined one of the major wholesalers and started their RX ownership program where, he was able to work with hundreds of buyers and sellers to transition those businesses. And now, as you can see behind him, it looks like his third career is building guitars and tractors. So,
yeah.
But lucky to have Bob. Drew and I have both been with the bank since the inception of the pharmacy division. And then Drew is also a pharmacy owner as well. So with all that being said, it depends on which day you ask me, but I like to think we know what we're doing, but I guess that can be debatable. But and then lastly, I think our level of service sets us apart. We pride ourselves in providing a one-on-one experience, just like you do for your patients. A lot of times going through the lending process, you end up with a whole list of names and numbers of people asking you for stuff. And, I try to always tell people that, getting the process, you'll get my cell phone number, and that's really the only number you'll
Thanks, Bo. And next off, what do we have? How can we lend to them? What do we have to offer there, Bo?
Yes, we have financing for a number of needs. First and foremost, and really probably our sweet spot is working with either first-time buyers or existing owners to acquire a pharmacy. Sometimes that includes acquisition of real estate or the building the pharmacy is located in, and sometimes it doesn't, which either way is fine. We work with the existing owners and want to do some expansion or even start a new store or do some remodeling on their existing location. Some owners need to refinance some existing debt, take out some working capital, so we work with people along those lines. We are one of the few banks that does startup lending. We don't do near as many as we used to, just being transparent. There's a lot of things that go into a startup, and that might be the right circumstance for some people, but we do encourage you to look at or at least consider buying, and we think there's some value there, having people come through the door day one versus having to start a business from scratch. Capital needs. So our lending, we fund anything from dollar amounts from $400,000 up to $5 million, which is the SBA cap per borrower. So if you do have some SBA debt now, that would go against that $5 million.
Well, we've already gotten a question. We've already gotten a question here. The gentleman says we were working on opening a chain of pharmacies in a local grocery store. How can we get finance for the project? How does it work, given the fact that each store will be a separate LLC corporation? I know our firm works with you guys on a lot of startup loans. Have some in process even right now. And Bo is correct. They're an expert at working in this particular area. But Bo, talk to this particular question here, if you don't mind.
Yeah. So as you said, we are very selective in our startups. In this situation, multiple startups at one time, with each LLC or each location being its independent LLC, would be each one of those LLCs would be a borrower. So you would have a new loan for each one of those entities.
Okay.
Next slide. Right. Yeah. I'll talk through this one a little bit. This is data that came from NCPA. They do an annual survey and survey their membership and get a lot of piles of statistics, but we selected just a few of them. And basically, this tells you in the first on the far left, the circle on the far left, I think what that really tells is that there's a lot of opportunity out there. About 1,000 stores change hands every year. So there's tons of opportunity. There's lots of guys that own stores that are ready to sell. So don't be discouraged. There's lots of opportunity in the field. The next, the middle three circles kind of give you averages of what the average pharmacy, NCPA pharmacy looks like. What's that useful for? Well, if you're looking at buying a store, it'll tell you whether that store is above average or below average. If it's below average, you might want to reconsider or look at the fact, is there potential there to bring it up to the averages or exceed the averages? So that kind of gives you a ballpark numbers of where you might be looking at any individual store. Finally, the last one, what we've seen in the industry is that the average owner owns around 2 stores. That means there's a lot of multiple store owners out there. My experience has been in dealing with hundreds of potential buyers is that the multiple store owners tend to be a bit more profitable than the single store owners. You have a lot of economies of scale that you can use. So what I'd like you to do is keeping that in the back of your mind. If you're going into buying your first business, keep in the back of your mind that getting to that second or third one would be important. I will give you one caveat though. What I've seen is when you own one store, you typically are an owner operator. You're filling a lot of the prescriptions, you're on the case a lot, and you're a businessman plus an owner operator. When you go into multiple stores, you kind of got to shift your focus and become more of a CEO. Focus less, you'd be spending less time on the case filling prescriptions and more time running the business. So keep that in mind as you expand. You have to kind of change your mindset a little bit too. But I would encourage you to keep that in your mind as you go into business, that owning multiple stores is a more profitable situation. Olin, would you agree with me on that?
I totally agree with you, Bob. In fact, we see once you get to about a 3 or 4 store arrangement, you're more in a working on your business than in your business, is what you just described. But while you got that first store or two, it's more working in it and on it all at the same time versus being really a true entrepreneur and managing what you have out there with your PICs in control. But most of our clients are multiple store owners. Most of those stores are in separate entities. When they're not in separate entities, there's some special issues related to when you want to put equity into certain members of maybe a professional staff that become problematic if you have everything aggregated into one corporation or one LLC. So there's a lot of different tax issues and planning issues here, as well as financing issues, as they've alluded to. Going back to the grocery store multiple owner situation, each loan I think would be a completely separate entity. Each loan would be looked at on its own versus one aggregate loan. So these are all important issues.
Thanks, Olin. Next slide, please. Next 2 slides really just talk to the fact that independents tend to be, they are provide better service for their patients. And these 2 surveys, this one and the next slide, were done by NCPA, and talks to the fact that the independent owner knows their clientele by name. They fill prescriptions much quicker than chains do. Next slide. Next slide on. Okay. And are really concerned about cost effectiveness for their patients. This is not just NCPA's study. Over the years, Consumer Reports, J.D. Powers have all done surveys on independents versus chains, and the independents always come in well ahead of the chains in service levels. Mention this because this is a really important marketing point for you. Keep that in mind when you're developing your marketing plan and your social media, that you provide much better service than the chains do. And I will say that what Bo mentioned about the bank provides a very similar service to you. As Bo mentioned, if he gives you his phone number, that's the only phone number you'll ever need through the whole process of closing a loan. So we tie in quite closely with this. Next slide, Ola. Bo, I think I'll let you talk through this one. There's a lot of different places, as we mentioned, there's a lot of opportunities out there, but where do you find them? And Bo, you've dealt with a lot of people and looking for businesses. Why don't you walk through this one for me?
Yeah. So even though I'm the banker, I'm always getting the question. If you hear of any good stores, let me know. Anything for sale. And the bad news is you don't drive down the street and drive past a pharmacy and see a for sale sign out in front. The good news is that there's some really good resources out there for you. A lot of times the wholesaler drug reps that are out in the field, they've got a good idea who's looking to sell. Also, all the major wholesalers have transition teams. Those are a great resource because you can use, one, they know what they're doing. Two, it comes at no cost to you. One thing not listed on there is pharmacy brokers, business brokers. They typically have listings of pharmacies for sale. And the pharmacy space is really a tight-knit community. As you're experiencing by here, but what we're doing today, partnering with Sykes. So just growing your network can always help as well. And then lastly, you may be surprised how effective it is, but simply dropping in a pharmacy and handing the owner a card and saying, I've got no reason to believe that you want to sell today, but if and when you do, I'd love to chat.
Yeah.
They may shoo you out the door, but 2 weeks later your phone might ring too.
Very true, Bo. When I owned stores, there wasn't a month that didn't go by that one of the major chains didn't drop in and want to make me an offer on the business. Um, so going out and just dropping in on stores and taking a look around and seeing if maybe they might want to sell, I think that's an excellent way to do it, especially if you want to stay in that particular community. Next slide, Owen.
In fact, I think that's one of the best ways to do it. Just get you some cards and hit the road about every 60 days and drop them off to the stores you're
Yeah,
interested in.
yeah, and like I said, we're going to talk on this slide a little bit about planning and versus buying a store and starting a store, but where you're willing to purchase a store, it goes back to what we just said, because if you want to stay in a certain town or a certain community, you may not hear of any stores from some of those sources that are for sale, but dropping into them, you may be able to find one in the community you're looking for. So let me just talk a little bit first here about buying a pharmacy or doing a startup. What I've seen over the years is that buying a pharmacy, it's a better proposition usually than doing a startup. I say that's usually, that's a generalization, but the fact is that return on invested capital is much quicker with a purchase than it is with a startup. Startups take a while to develop. They have to ramp up. The day you open your doors, you've never filled a prescription in that place. And depending on your locale and your marketing, you may only fill a few that day. You have to be very careful with your expenses. You may or may not be able to pull a full salary for a year or so. So startups are, depending on the location, depending on the startup, and as Olin said, they work a lot with startups. We work with startups, but we look very closely at the business plan and all the parameters that go into that. So my recommendation is look to buy one first, and then keep startup in your back pocket as your gut plan. So where are you willing to purchase? That's one of the things that when I was with RX ownership, we would get people looking to buy a store, but they wanted a very specific area. They were in in a town, and they wanted it in the southwest area of that town so they could walk to the store. Well, maybe there's one store in that town, in that area, and it's not for sale. So you have to be open to where the opportunities are. So just keep in mind that it may not be right in the block that you live in. You might have to widen your search a little bit. As far as what you should be looking for, as mentioned or in the previous slide, the average store size is around 3 million, 3.5 million, somewhere right in there, and that's about the size store we'd be looking for. You drop below that, it gets a lot harder to get a cash flow, positive cash flow in the smaller stores. So you want to be looking at size. Staffing, excuse me, is important because stores that have been around a long time very often are overstaffed, and they have people they've been hanging on for a long time. So look at the staffing requirements. It may be just the opposite. It may be a store that has ramped up very quickly and they're understaffed. So you may be having to add staff to it. Are they into any other services or specialized markets? Do they do any kind of compounding? Do they have clinical services? Do they have specialty drugs? That type of thing. So understand what markets and services they provide. And then the final one is critically important, and one that gets overlooked a bit sometimes. You have to have a good attorney to write up a lot of the documents, and you want an attorney that knows pharmacy. Not just any attorney will work sometimes. So make sure that your choice of attorney is someone that really understands pharmacy, and you can get recommendations there from a lot of different places. If you're working with a company like Sykes and Company, they could recommend someone if it's needed. Your local pharmacy association, or other people that are already in the business. CPA, Olin, how many times do you see plans when financials, when somebody's trying to sell and they didn't have a CPA and the financials are a disaster?
Well, because we do so much due diligence, Bob, looking at transactions potentially representing buyers, unfortunately, we see a lot of it, and the accounting information and data that's out there and the tax information, unfortunately, in more than half the situations is not where it needs to be. Most accountants in this business don't understand what a DRF or a PBM is, much less anything else in this industry. And the accounting is typically not where it needs to be. It may be on a pure cash and receipts basis. And we're big believers you've got to have full accrual numbers each and every month. How you report for tax purposes is a whole other situation. But Bob, I think your point is your team needs to be very experienced in the legal healthcare, accounting, pharmacy, banking arena that understands this niche. This is not rocket science, but it's different. And somebody that closes your real estate transaction or maybe does your 1040 may not be the one to help you in this process, or your banker across the street that lends you money to buy a car. You're looking at people that are specialists in the industry here with the first financial bank crowd, both in terms of transitions and startups, and they'd be a great place to start to take a look at a transaction. But you got to have this team in place, otherwise you'll be making some serious mistakes. And just one other quick comment here. Um, I totally agree, Bob, that you buying a larger store makes the most sense. And anything under about that $3.5 million revenue range makes it very tough to really get the cash flow and the profitability that you want. I like to tell people that go out and find the most expensive store that you can from a revenue perspective and from a selling perspective, because in this environment with low interest rates and with money flowing by way of the SBA 7A program, now's the time to really grab something that really can turn cash and profitability very quickly versus having to spend a lot of time building up either a startup or taking a $1.5 million or $2 million operation and growing it. Find your 5, 6, 7, $8 million operation. They're out there. Yes, they're going to be more expensive. Yes, they may require more down payment, but the money is available. These guys that you're looking at here can make that happen. So I would just make that comment about that process, Bob.
Well,
Yeah, and
thanks,
I'll
Alan.
add to that.
Yeah,
I'll add to
go ahead.
that because you got to think about it when you're buying a pharmacy already in existence. You got revenue coming in the door day one versus a startup where you are really doing everything you can to get revenue in the door. So it's a completely different situation, which is why startups are uniquely different and more difficult in a lot of ways. Um, but going back to the team, who's on your team? I can't tell you the many times we've seen where the team um, wasn't really qualified for pharmacy, and it really can cost you down the road. It can cause a lot of headache, a lot of delays. A good quality pharmacy acquisition team, attorney, CPA, bank, wholesaler, they're going to make sure everything's done right. You're actually in a good situation. You're going to maximize the value of what you're doing, of what you're buying. You're going to be able to negotiate that sales price the way it should be. You're going to find yourself in the best position and set yourself up from success day one. Whereas those who don't, they end up coming back to a qualified team years down the road to fix issues or remedy some areas. So that team is very important.
Thanks, guys. And I'll give an unsolicited recommendation. Before this call started, I was talking to Bo and the team here, and we mentioned that when we're working on a deal that Sykes has worked on, we don't have any problems. That's always a smooth deal. So I can highly recommend these guys. They're tremendous partners with us. Next slide, please. Well, we'll be prepared. I don't have much to say on that one, Olin. You can go on to the next one. This is kind of a timeline, so to speak, of what goes into finding a pharmacy to buy. And you can look through, you can kind of walk through it. I will stress the good credit. Maintaining a good credit score is really important. And I know a lot of y'all have have student debt still, we can work with that. That's not an issue that locks us out of the loan. And Owen, you mentioned going after that $5, $6, $7 million store. I hear it all the time. I'll never be able to borrow $5 or $6, $7 million. Well, if you have a good credit score, there's a lot of ways we can work with you. So don't be scared off by that. But that good credit score is important. I think we look at about 680 or above on a credit score. The higher, the better. But if it's below that, you might want to work on your credit score before you start looking for a pharmacy. Obviously, finding the right pharmacy. It's key to us having one of the members of the team buying, whether it's a single purchaser or a group putting together, that at least one of the buyers is a registered pharmacist in the state that you're buying in. So have a valid pharmacy license or access to one. Obviously, you have to have the desire to buy. Understanding the opportunity, very important. Due diligence, can't say enough about. You have to really look hard at the financials, at the business trends, what's going on in the industry, what's the next step for you. You know, what opportunities will you have, and we'll talk a bit valuation a little bit later. If you find someone, if you find an old guy like me that's got time on his hands, that's willing to talk to you, finding a guy that's been in the business for a while, that's been successful, somebody just be able to bounce things off of, ask questions of, that's really a plus for you. Bo, this is about where the bank comes into this process. Why don't you talk a little bit about what happens from here on?
Yeah, like I said, it's always good to speak with a lender, early on, understand what's going to be required from them. I'm always available to take a look at financials during the due diligence and say, that not giving approval, but say, hey, yeah, this thing's got some legs or it doesn't. As Alan said, they do a lot of the due diligence. So that being said, until there's an actual letter of intent in place, it may be premature to go through the whole loan approval process. But once that buyer and the seller agree on a price and a structure, then the lender can gather the necessary items to present for the loan approval. Once that loan is approved, then we can start the process of valuations, appraisals, gathering everything towards a closing. Very similar to buying a house. You get a contract on a house, you go to the bank, they say yes, we'll do the loan. Then they order the appraisal. Same with the business valuation. So, once the business valuation comes back, if everything's good, we keep on rolling. In the scenario where it comes in and it doesn't appraise for the sale price, and there's we got some renegotiating to do, or some things we can do. Either renegotiate the price, which would be the smartest thing, and get it down to what the business is worth. You can always put more cash into it, or have the seller carry a note, or you walk away. So in general terms, it takes us about, once we get an approval, about 45, 60 days to close a loan. Sometimes shorter, sometimes that can drag on for a number of reasons.
And I'll throw in the fact that Bo kind of mentioned that sometimes we say no, and I'm sure Alden and Scotty, sometimes you advise them that this isn't the deal to do. When we do it from a banking standpoint, sure, we're protecting the bank. We want to make sure the loan is good, but we're also protecting you, because if we don't want to fund it, that usually means it's not a very good deal and you're not going to be successful. So when you have a great accounting firm like Sykes and you're working with a bank like us, take that advice. That we're not saying that just because we don't want to do the deal. We're saying it because it doesn't look like the deal's going to work. So,
And Bob,
yeah.
if I may, when you're presented an opportunity from someone looking to buy a pharmacy, you're also looking at the buyer and what, are they qualified? Do they have what it takes to carry on or to take this pharmacy and take it to another level, et cetera, et cetera. So you're also, you're not only looking at the pharmacy, but aren't you guys also looking at the borrower and the buyer itself to be confident that they can, run a business effectively?
Yeah, Bo, you deal with this all the time.
Yeah, no question. I mean, one, we look at, their financial stability, and how qualified they are on paper. But yeah, as you mentioned, also experience is a key, and how comfortable and how capable are they to step in and operate that business.
Some of the things we look at is in their, Bo mentioned their experience. It's do they have any management experience? Let's say they've been working for a chain. Were they a manager in that chain operation? Were they able to move up in the organization they were in? So yeah, Scotty, that's very critical. What is their how do they feel about running a business? Are they comfortable running a business? Do they have the knowledge? Do they have any business experience? Have they taken any business courses? Having an MBA is not required, but having taken some business courses would be an excellent idea in understanding business. So you're absolutely right. It's financials as well as the person that's buying.
And Bob, I'll chime in one other thing. If you don't have it, I would say the scenario we love is we've got a retiring owner and a pharmacist that's either worked there or been the pharmacist in charge in that pharmacy. They're familiar with it. All we're doing is switching drivers. So if you're thinking about ownership, maybe try to find a situation where you can come in and work in a pharmacy for a year or 2 years, whatever, until that owner's ready to sell and kind of get familiar with that business.
Okay, let's go to the next slide, Alan. Valuation. The one thing that I will say about this, and Bo, I'll let you talk about the 3 bullets there, but the one thing I will say about valuation is it gives you an idea of what that business is worth. It's not a set number. It's not something that's specific. So let me give you an example. If you've ever bought or sold a house, particularly if you're selling a house, the realtor comes in and gives you some comps. Basically, they're looking at other houses in that area that have sold that are about the same size as yours. Does that mean that's what yours is worth? Not really. That just kind of gives you a ballpark of where it should be. Yours might be worth more because you've done a lot of improvements to it. Might be worth less. So the valuation just gives you kind of a starting point to make an offer. So it kind of gives you a ballpark of where it should be. I always tell the sellers they ought to have several numbers in mind. One is what do they think it's worth? What does the valuation say it is, and what are they willing to take? So valuations are not a precise example of what a pharmacy is worth. So Bo, why don't you walk through the 3 steps there for me?
Yeah, so we can cover these, and I think these are probably not necessarily in order. I'd say number 1 and number 3 really the most important initial things that we'll look at. Last 3 years tax returns on the business, and then the most recent income statement and balance sheet. They're going to show what the cash flow that's generated by that business. The dispensing reports, they'll give us a good idea of the mix of the business. Might identify any red flags, such as a high concentration of certain drugs or prescribers or payers. It's critical, as we talked about earlier, it's critical to understand the quality of the financials that you're looking at. Are they written down on a napkin? Are they prepared by a professional? Or more importantly, somebody like Sykes, that's a professional with pharmacy experience. So go ahead.
Oh no, go ahead, Bo. I'm sorry.
Okay. Now, so when we're analyzing those financials, it's also important to, identify any expenses in there that are non-recurring or at the seller's discretion, and it won't be incurred after the sale. Those are what we consider add backs to the cash flow. A lot of times those are going to be, items such as interest, appreciation, amortization, and then, personal expenses such as, maybe the owner's auto expense or insurance or payments they're making to a family member that doesn't actually work there. Bob, I'm sure over the years you've seen some creative expenses.
Yeah. So we call it normalizing the financials, and add backs are done all the time. And as Bo said, they're simple things like country club dues or autos or insurance. But I had a fellow in Texas that his delivery expense was huge. I've never seen a delivery expense that big. And I asked him, I said, what is this? This guy's selling the store. You got a giant delivery expense. What is that? You have a fleet of trucks or something? He goes, oh no, that's my airplane. And I said, you deliver prescriptions in an airplane? He goes, Texas is a big state, boy. Well, I said, well, that's between your accountant and you and the IRS. I got a huge ad back, so that's going to make this deal look a whole lot better. So yeah, so that's one of the things we do. Oh, and Scotty, you do the same thing here. You look at the
Oh
same
yeah, I
things
tell
we
you,
do.
this is an area we really dive into because if we're representing a potential buyer, we want to not only take a look at the financials that have been issued, we want to take the accounting file itself and dig down onto it for the last 3 or 4 years. Because when we dig down and do a deep dive interpretation of what's behind those numbers, we learn really whether those numbers are valid or not. Because obviously, if you're the bank, all you can do is take the numbers that are provided to you. But if those numbers are not any good, and I'm sure you are like us, you see numbers all the time that are all over the place and that you can't really depend on. What you're really trying to do is to figure out what the true cash value, what the true EBITDA or earnings before interest, taxes, depreciation, and amortization is going to be, or the true cash flow is available to the new potential buyer to repay debt and existing expenses of the new pharmacy. So you got to get a real understanding of what the history has been, how the owner is taking care of themselves and their families, etc. What kind of retirement plans, cars. I've seen 4 Porsches on a depreciation schedule before in a Nevada pharmacy, Bob, of all places.
That doesn't surprise me.
Yeah, it doesn't either. But you
Bob,
really
was that
got to figure
yours?
out what's here. And then the tax returns, Scotty, why don't you talk about some of the tax returns that we've seen?
Well, this is obviously, like you said, this is a big area we dive into. We've seen so much as far as books and records and tax returns that are not that make no sense really. So we spend a lot of time here, and what we learn from that is really what exactly they're buying or not buying. And then when we consider whether it's a stock or an asset purchase, um, you can really put together the pieces and put together a good solid um, proposal to the seller that you can be confident in knowing because you've done the due diligence process. So there's a lot that goes into this, digging in the books, digging in those tax returns, whether they match, whether they make sense, whether the balance sheet's tied in, accrual versus a cash accounting. There's just so much that can go into this that's really going to shed light on exactly what you're buying or not buying. So this part cannot be overlooked from anyone out there looking to buy.
Yeah, and this is really where you really need expert help helping you in this arrangement, because if a broker is representing a store, all they're trying to do is close a transaction. They could care less about you. They just want to close the transaction, get their 10% commission, and go on. They don't care about the numbers underneath. Uh, the reverse would be the situation for us. All we do is care about the numbers that are underneath. And of course, you cannot determine the valuation or the price until after all this is complete. I don't know how many deals I look at that come to us where the first conversation with the seller, they've already decided the number, what the number is going to be, and none of this has ever taken place. It's kind of, as we say in the business, bass backwards. So you just have to be very careful that you understand this particular area when you're going through that valuation process in order to determine the pharmacy worth and et cetera. So guys, you want to take this one?
I'm gonna add a little bit back to what you said. Obviously we do consider that back, but they do need to be quantifiable, or we, but the old CAT, everybody's, that's the one that always, if I can't see it on paper from a bank standpoint, I hear it all the time. Well, the owner's put a bunch of cash in his pocket. Well, we've got to go with what's on those tax returns.
Yep.
And we've got to be able to validate any of those add backs.
That's correct.
If it's not on paper, it doesn't exist, right, Alan?
That's correct.
So when we're looking at what a pharmacy is worth, again, you got to take into account, you know, what are people willing to accept? You know, as I said to this, told sellers, you know, you have to have a number in mind. You know, what's your bottom line number? What number are you willing to take, and won't go any below that? And then how much is the buyer willing to pay? And importantly, how much will we lend you? Um, I think we all touched on it to a degree, but just to be very specific, cash flow is king. If the cash flow analysis doesn't work, the deal doesn't work. As Owen said, there has to be enough money to pay back the loan. Um, what the pharmacy is worth is really determined kind of by doing that cash flow analysis. And if it comes out negative, the selling price is too high. That's just the way it works. And of course, you know, you're going to have to be able to earn a typical compensation, repay the debt, and importantly, it has to appraise. You know, there are times, Bo, I'm sure you've seen them, where we do an appraisal and the appraisal comes in quite a bit lower than what the asking price is.
Yeah, no question. I mean, it's back to the scenario Alan just talked about. I mean, you know, there's a price set in mind, and somebody's just got their heels dug in that they're going to buy this pharmacy for this price without doing the cash flow analysis, and that's where you run into a problem.
Right.
Now, just speaking of cash flow, Bob, you know, again, that's, as you said, cash flow is king, and it's pretty simple. I mean, what we're trying to do is show that the pharmacy generates enough revenue to pay you a market salary, service any of the debt, and have a little left over for some cushion. We like to see at a minimum a debt service coverage of 1.3, preferably higher, depending on the size of the deal, which means that pharmacy is generating income of 1.3 times the annual debt payment.
Next slide, Owen. This is a busy slide, so I'm not going to read through them all, but there are listed here a lot of things that make a pharmacy attractive. We mentioned the $3 million mark before. If it's a pharmacy that's at least $3 million in revenue, that's a good deal or higher. Good profitability, balanced expenses, staffing, and all that stuff. Not attractive. The one thing that I really want to mention here is the fact that it's underperforming and has limited growth profile. The one thing that I hear all the time with sellers is, well, it's got good potential, so that's why I'm selling it for this number. Well, we don't necessarily pay for potential. We pay for what's on the paper. And so don't get into a point where you're sold on the potential and looking at too high a selling price because of the potential. Another one here that I run into in the past with my stores is lease terms. I mean, you can get some ugly lease terms, and you have to really be careful. That's where someone like Owen or Scotty can really give you some advice on how that lease is going to work, because there's things can be hidden in the leases that can be actually catastrophic for you. So you have to really take a close look at this. I'll let you all read through these. There's a lot here on it, but basically you have to look at what's good and what's bad and go from there.
Agreed.
Next slide, Alan. Bo, valuation formulas. I've done a lot of valuation formula. Valuation is always a question that's come up to me for years. And I've done a lot of research in it, and I found research papers where they have 35 to 40 different valuation formulas. We've honed in on basically 3 and use one of them primarily, but these are the 3 most popular valuation formulas. And we're going to have an example of one of them that Bo can walk you through in a minute, but multiple of cash flow is the one that we really use mostly or exclusively. So Owen mentioned EBITDA, which is earnings before interest, taxes, and depreciation. So basically you take interest, taxes, and depreciation out of the earnings, and that's your number. You'll notice that all 3 of these say plus inventory. That's a floating number. It changes every day in the pharmacy. And the actual inventory number really doesn't come into play until the night before it's sold, and usually a third-party inventory team comes in and gives you the actual number. So the valuation really is independent of inventory.
Hey, Bob, just on that
Yeah.
inventory, you're correct. And, a lot of times the inventory is done the night before, but it's important to have a good idea of what that's going to be because we have to build a loan package around that. And we don't need any real surprises there at the end.
Yeah, and a lot of the stores I've seen don't have a running inventory on an accurate basis, maybe not take inventories every year. So Bo's correct. If a store is going for sale, if there are any sellers on this webinar, make sure you know pretty close to what your inventory is. It's going to change, and the final one won't come in until the last minute, but you have to have a really good idea of it. If we're doing multiples of cash flow, we're going to take EBITDA plus inventory, and the marketing average is about 2.5 to 4 times that number. The other two are ballpark ones. They give you an idea of what it is, but again, it's kind of a ballpark. Why don't we go to the next slide and take a look at what it looks like, Colin? So this is an example. You have a $4 million store, $65,000 in annual prescriptions. The normalized EBITDA is shown here. So if we walk through this, you can see that their last tax year's return was 145,000, but then they had 60,000 for depreciation and amortization. The owner took a $50,000 bonus out every year. They were driving a Lexus and using a spouse for bookkeeping, which was a bit fictitious. So if you add all that back together, you come up with the normalized EBITDA of 315,000, and you can see the results on the formulas ranging between what do we got here, 800,000 up to 945. We typically would be using option one, and it's interesting this example worked out this way because usually option one is lower than the other two, but that's the one that we typically will use. Bo, you have any comments on this one?
Yeah, I mean, to your point, I mean, doing what I do on a day-to-day basis, option one is what we're going to use as a bank, and then anybody that we utilize to do a business valuation is going to pretty much.
And Owen, from an accounting standpoint, how valuable are the valuations to you?
Well, they're all over the place typically that we see. Again, if the books and records and the tax returns are valid after the due diligence is complete, meaning that we can get a normalized EBITDA or cash flow of that business, then I would agree that option one is typically what we see in an asset purchase type of transaction. And that kind of goes into the next slide because we're kind of running out of time here, guys.
Yeah, I'll have
The
to speed up
kinds
here
of
a little bit.
purchases, as I know you see different kinds of purchases, and I'll let you talk about that just a moment.
Yeah,
so you have, yeah, go ahead, Bo, you take it.
Yeah,
go ahead.
basically, as you mentioned, we got to know how to properly structure the deal. First thing we're going to know is whether it's an asset purchase or a stock purchase. The asset purchase, you'll be establishing a new entity and purchasing assets of that business. A stock purchase, you would be purchasing the existing entity of that established business. We won't get into all that today in essence of time, but lean on your advisors. They'll help you determine what's best for your situation. Second piece we need to know is the down payment. SBA requires, in our world, SBA world, we refer to as an equity injection. They require 10% of the total project cost. That's going to come from, in most cases, cash from the borrower. There are some scenarios where we can utilize a seller note for up to half of that, or 5%, which has to be on a full standby note, which means they won't take payments for until the bank loan is fully satisfied, which is usually about 10 years. So that's oftentimes a tough sell, but it can be used. It's important to keep in mind the 10% injections of the total project cost. That's not the purchase price. The total project cost is going to consist of the purchase price plus your inventory, any working capital that's added into the loan, and the loan fees and closing costs. Working capital is having sufficient working capital is crucial. You'll probably need more than you think. I'd love to hear what Scotty and Alan says. We have time, but if there's kind of a rule of thumb for how much working capital they would recommend, that'd be great.
as much as possible. There's things always are coming up that you don't anticipate or expect.
Let's go to the next slide, Alan. So this is just an example that we talked about, and you can take a look at this one. It's the funding sources are there. In this example, it was $140,000 down payment, and the bank note was 1.26, and the seller wasn't involved. So that's just a simple example of what we were talking about. Next slide, Alan.
Okay.
Bo, this is kind of what you look at when you're doing a loan.
Yeah, so I mean, again, we first step, get buyer and seller get together, get a letter of intent and a term sheet. At that point, get your bank involved, get with your advisor, determine what that purchase is going to look like, asset purchase or stock purchase. You can start working on wholesalers, leases, all that stuff, and then ultimately the transfer of funds. From the loan and the down payment to the seller, and then you're an owner.
And this is where our lenders, Bo or Drew, will really work with you on walking you through what's needed, and so will your accountant, Alan or Scotty, would work with you all the way through this process to make sure all these steps are taken. Next slide. These are just a bunch of do's and don'ts. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on them, but you can take a look at them yourselves. And basically, it's expect the unexpected is probably the big one there. And then leverage your pharmacy experts, us and the CPA, Owen, and your attorneys. And on the don'ts, don't be emotional. Don't get sold on the business because you really love it and you feel in your gut this is just the wonderful thing. Be rational. Don't look at it from an emotional standpoint. Look at it from a business standpoint. Look at the numbers, do the due diligence, and take the advice of your accountants on this one.
Absolutely. Don't let your emotions carry you away. There's no question. And by the way, just another reminder, everybody that's registered and on this program will get a copy of the recorded link that you can replay this at a later time. And of course, guys, here's your team. Any comments here about your team?
Well, yeah, as you can see, they used a picture of me that I don't know where they got that, or they photoshopped it or something. That's the what's that called, catfishing picture there. But what I'd like to mention here is follow us on social media. We're on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and LinkedIn, and our handle is at Pharmacy Lender. So we've got all, except for me, everybody's got their email address. You can get my email address almost anywhere, but don't hesitate to reach out to us for advice, and we'd be happy to work with you.
And very quickly, Scotty, talk to them about the RX assessment service that Sykes & Company does for those pharmacies that are out there that would like a third-party review of what they're doing.
Yeah, so we do an RX assessment service where we take the accounting file, the tax returns, kind of like what we were talking about in that due diligence slide there, and we'll essentially do that due diligence for a particular pharmacy, overview what's going on in the accounting file, what the issues, concerns are on the tax, and give you a third-party overview of what we see, good, bad, and indifferent, really, and give you a roadmap of the things we see or the issues or things you're doing very well with. And give you that feedback, being this is all we do is pharmacy, accounting, tax, and advisory. So we'd be happy to help you out with that. It's on our website there on the homepage, right at the very top. You'll see RX assessment link.
Yeah, and when we complete that, we do an hour-long video call with you, going through this in detail. And all the information we talked about today is in general nature, so make sure you get your own specific advice from your advisors. Here, Scotty and ours contact information. Please contact us or link with us at Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter, YouTube. And we've got a number of questions, guys. We've got just a few minutes. How does a PPP loan affect valuation based on 2020 financials? Bo, you want to answer that one?
So, we're talking about a sale here. Typically for the.
I would assume, yeah. Talking about affecting does a PPP loan affect evaluation on a
It's an
2020?
effective valuation. It's going to need to be, that PPP loan is going to need to be forgiven for us to go through with the transition.
Yeah, I think the SBA has a requirement on that. Do they not?
Yeah, that's right.
Here's another question. If you need to remain anonymous when looking to buy a pharmacy due to currently working for a chain, what would be the advice other than walking into an independent pharmacy to inquire?
Ooh. Anonymity is one of the things that when I worked I developed, launched, and managed RX ownership, a transition program for one of the major wholesalers, and anonymity was our big thing. And I know the other wholesalers do the same thing. So if you can work with someone like that, it will help you a lot, and they will keep you completely anonymous. So brokers, I think, tend to keep you fairly anonymous, but it is something you'd have to kind of word of mouth. But working with one of the transition teams at one of the wholesalers, I think, would probably be the easiest. Bo, you think of anything else?
No, I agree. I think everybody in this space does a good job of that. There, you could have an NDA signed.
Yeah.
So what about
And
purchasing a pharmacy in this current environment, guys? Any feedback on that? We're what the SBA has available now, and just the environment we're in today.
Well, the pharmacies I talked to, I talked to a lot of different pharmacies when the virus first hit, and to find out how they were doing. And what I found was that they had a dip in revenue, a short-term dip in revenue, because they were still filling maintenance prescriptions, but some of the acute stuff was not getting filled. People weren't going to the dentist. People were not getting elective surgeries done. People weren't going to urgent care or emergency rooms for illnesses. So that kind of leveled out after a while. And because pharmacies were one of the few businesses that could stay open, they actually weathered it fairly well. Bo, what was your experience with that?
Agreed. And back to the SBA environment. I mean, right now, it's all about finding the right fit in the right store. But as far as getting financing and money being cheap and incentives out there, there's no better time.
And guys, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention that the NCPA has a virtual ownership workshop next weekend, last weekend in January. It's a 2.5-day intensive virtual ownership. Learn whether you're a buyer, seller, startup, whatever. It's an absolutely must do if you want further information about this. Would be our suggestion. And guys, that's about all the time we have today, and it's been our pleasure to have you with us, and we appreciate everybody being on the call.
Thank you very much.
Thanks,
We
Bob.
appreciate
Thanks,
it.
Bo.
Y'all have a great day and stay well.
All right.
Thanks,
You too.
guys.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
You guys.
Bye.